Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, dayon ha'emes. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who is the righteous judge. Tefillah l'Moshe ish Elohim Adonai mo'an atah yisolanu b'dor v'dor. B'terem harim yuladu b'ad chol eretz v'evel. U'me'olam ad olam atah el. Toshevenu shadako v'tov shuv v'nei Adam. Ki elav shonim beinecha ki yom esmol ki yavar v'asmura b'laylo. Zeram tom sheino yiyu b'boker. Kechotzir yachalo b'boker yotzitz v'cholof. Lo erev yimolel v'yovesh ki cholinu ba'apecho v'mascho nifholnu. Lord, you have been our refuge from generation to generation. Before the mountains were born, before the earth was fashioned, from eternity to eternity, you are the everlasting God. Though our bodies return unto the earth, our souls return unto you, O Lord. You say, return, and 1,000 years are in your sight, as a passing day or an hour of night. 70 our years may number. 80 have granted the vigor. Life is laden with trouble, but more, life quickly passes and flies away. Who can measure the reverence which is due unto you, O Lord? Teach us therefore to use all of our days, that we attain a heart of wisdom. Relent, O Lord, and have compassion, and grant us of your love. Match the days of sorrow with the days of joy. Then your servants will see your power, your children will know your glory. The favor of the Lord our God, may it be upon us. May he establish the work of our hands, and the work of our hands, may they be established. I'd like to call upon members of the family to speak in behalf of the family about the life of Allan Leikin. I'm going to call upon Shirley, Bert, Jimmy, and Ronnie.
Thank you all for coming. In 1947, Milt and I were dating, and he decided that it was time I met his mother and father. So that Friday night, we went to dinner at his house in East Cleveland. I was excited because, being an only child, this was my chance to have 2 brothers, Jerry and Allan. There were 10 years separating the boys. At that time, Allan was 13, Jerry was 18, and Milt was 23. They were very devoted brothers, and since Milt was already a businessman, he took pride in giving love, advice, and meant money to his siblings. Jerry soon after went to college, and Allan and I became fast friends. You could say we were bosom buddies. He 13 and me 18. But Allan's greatest thrill was to be with his brother Milt, who he loved and admired the most. Allan would take the bus or rapid transit, I think they called them rapid transits in those days, from East Cleveland to 30th and Euclid on Saturdays and sometimes after school, and sweep the floors or wash the cars, just to watch and listen to his brother sell cars. After graduation, he went off to Ohio State. Then he went to California to join his parents who moved there. Went to UCLA for a year or 2, and then came back to Cleveland and attended Kent State. He was an all-around college boy, my brother-in-law, Allan. But one day, he came to Milt and said, I've had enough of college. I want to sell cars and be with you. That was the beginning, from Euclid Avenue, used car row, They went to Willoughby and had new and used cars. It was a long and caring association. Allan made a baseball fan out of me. We attended all opening day games every season for years. He kept score, and I ran up and down the aisle getting him hot coffee. Allan led a very colorful life, to say the least. He had many lifelong friends who are also here, and I'm sure someone's going to fill you in on all the activities that they carried on. We've been a close, loving family. Allan and Jerry treated our kids like they were their children, and they took them everywhere until later, when Allan found Jerry and Jerry found Pat, and they brought to our family Kim and Todd, and Pat brought us her two boys, who were also named Jim and Jeff. We've been a close family, as I've said before. We went through good times, hard times, like everyone else does. But Allan had many years of illnesses, brain surgeries, heart surgery, but the last 2 years were the worst. He was housebound, but managed to meet a few loyal friends almost every Friday downstairs at the Fifth Avenue Grill. The good-natured, kind, friendly, caring Allan at times became irritable, stubborn, and an angry person. But the end of my tale is good, because last week when I went to the hospital to visit him, he was now at Regency. He greeted me with a big smile, sitting in a chair, and said, being an authority on hospitals, since I've been in so many, and I argued with him then, I said, you know, you're not an authority on everything, Allan. So, in the meantime, I lost my place. In the meantime, he said, they take great care of me here. The nurses, the doctors, they give me everything, and anything I want to eat, they give it to me. He said, this is the best place ever. And I'll tell you, Shirley, he said, I feel better than I've felt in 2 years. I looked at him with my mouth open. I said, Allan, I said, what's happened to you? You're a different person. He said, Shirley, he said, I've come to peace with myself. He said, I've been reflecting the last 2 days about my family. He said, I've been thinking of my mother and father, who were caring, who took care of us and raised 3 fine men. He said, I'm thinking about my brothers, Jerry and Milt, and Jerry and I got along great most of the time. He said, and the many times when Milt and I would have an argument about something, I would think I was right, but now I realize he was right, I was wrong. And it was a great relationship. He said, and I knew I was going to get lost sooner or later, but anyhow, he looked at me and he said, Shirley, I can't tell you how I looked at my life after all that. And I looked at my life and I thought, look how lucky I've been. I've been everywhere. I've traveled all over. I've made money. I've lost money. I've made wonderful friends. He said, and if I died tomorrow, I'd be a happy person. And I looked at him and I was speechless. I said, Allan, I said, I can't believe how you've changed. He said, Shirley, he said, I'm telling you, if I die tomorrow, I'll be a happy person. And I looked at him and I smiled, and I was speechless. But I can only say now that he made me happy, and I can't mourn him because I know he died a happy person. And he's with his brother Milt, and I'll talk to both of them just like I've been talking to Milt all these years.
How are you? So I was trying to get my notes together. I had a lot of stuff written down in longhand, and I got on the computer and tried to print it out. And when I looked at the desktop of my computer, I saw something that said Leikin birthday, And before Al got sick, we used to go out and celebrate birthdays and have a few drinks, and everybody had a toast. Well, one year I wrote a little limerick about Al. We could call it Ode to Al. So I thought it was a little appropriate for now. There's a guy I have known for years, through laughter and even some tears, through thick and through thin, a good friend he's been, and a model for all of his peers. He has stories that tend to amaze, which usually are laced with high praise. His imagination will soar. You'll be gasping for more as his tales rise to a new phase. I would like to declare here tonight that I've noticed that you're usually right on matters of state and public debate. You're our pundit, and you bring us light. This fellow I speak of today is named Leikin, and I'm here to say that I hope you can see you're a great pal to me, and I wish you a happy birthday. Every once in a while, a very special person comes along. My friend Allan Leikin was one of those people. I believe he made an impression on everyone who knew him. I met Allan in junior high school, Patrick Henry. I admired him. He made friends easily. He seemed to know everybody. He had a nice way with girls, and he had the uncanny ability to converse with adults. I was hoping I could learn something from him. I wanted to get to know him. Well, we did become friends, and I did learn a lot about Allan. He had a very interesting family. He lived with his mother and father, his brother Jerry, then known as Tex. Tex they called because they lived in Texas for a while, and they moved there because his dad had asthma, and then they came back. I was always amazed by the fact that they called Jerry Tex. They never called Al Tex. He lived in Texas. Milt lived in Texas. They didn't call him Tex, but I don't know. I remember his father. His father was a plumber. He had an unusual truck, a little truck. It was called a sedan delivery. A sedan delivery was actually a two-door sedan, which had a back door where the trunk would ordinarily be. His truck was packed with plumbing supplies, and he operated his business from his truck. Either Allan or Jerry would go with their father. They could only one of them go because there was only one more passenger seat in the truck. The work was hard and dirty, but they did it. They helped their dad. And I remember sometimes I would see Allan coming back, and he was all full of grease and dirty, and that was not like Allan. He was very fastidious. But he talked at times about being a plumber, and I never did understand that. Jerry, as you know, went on to become a successful lawyer and married Pat. And at this time in Allan's life, and forevermore, Allan was inspired by his brother Milt. I think that it's impossible to overestimate the influence that Milt had on Allan. Milt was like a cult hero. He quit school in his early teens to help support his family during the Depression. They were living in Texas. He was in the Army, and then he was out of the Army. He sold jewelry, and then he sold cars, and then he started a business in his teens. And as Shirley said, he had a successful business on Euclid Avenue at the age of 22 with a lovely wife. A school dropout, his story was right out of Horatio Alger. Allan was in awe of him, and so were a lot of other people. Later on, we went to Glenville High School. Adam was a good student with an eye to studying business. He took all the bookkeeping courses that he could. He was very interested in history, and for all the rest of his life, he was a history buff. And you may be surprised to know that he had committed long passages of English literature to memory, including the works of Shakespeare and Sir Walter Scott. He could recite the Friends, Romans, Countrymen soliloquy at the drop of a hat, and you didn't have to ask him twice. But that isn't all. While at Glenville, he played football, and he earned a place on the varsity team. Allan knew sports. He followed all our teams. He was a big fan, and he loved to bet on football and baseball, and I think he was a pretty good handicapper. While we were in high school, we worked together in a shoe store on Saturdays. Allan was a good salesman. We worked from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Then we went home and got dressed to go out on a date starting at 10 o'clock. It was crazy, but that's the way things were. And I loved to double with Allan because very often he would borrow a car from Milt, and Milt had big cars. He'd come with a big Cadillac or deuce and a quarter, and they were all mint cars. And sometimes, I'm going off script here, Allan would let me drive one of the cars. I know Milt made him swear he wouldn't let anybody drive the car, but he wanted to get in the back seat with the girl, so he let me drive. I love to drive those cars. After Glenville, Al went to Kent for a while. He stayed there for a while, and then, like Shirley said, he went to work for Milt. Milt and Allan formed a partnership. They did well together for many, many years, and then they parted company. After that, Allan became a manufacturer's rep. Then he became a Dodge dealer in Youngstown, then a Hyundai dealer, and then a partner in a Ford store. And I think it was somewhere around the time that he was a manufacturer's rep that he met Jerry. They fell in love and got married and began a new life together. Jerry and Allan traveled the world together. They spent winters in Florida. They enjoyed each other's company. And Allan liked and cared for Kim and Todd, and they liked him, and they had a nice home and a nice family. Allan loved to make parties. He made lots of parties, sparing no expense. He made birthdays for Kim and Jerry, and a wedding when he and Jerry got married, and a wedding for Kim, and lots more. And Allan was family conscious. He loved to get together with his family, and later on, when it became difficult for him to get around, and the Leikins would get together, he would come in a wheelchair if necessary. Shirley was a very important part of Allan's life. I had a hard time trying to find words to describe their relationship. I thought about it a long time, and it's hard to define, but I would like to put it like this. Even though Allan was very outspoken, I think he would have rather lost an arm than to offend Shirley. One of the things I'm going to miss about Allan are his stories. Allan was a raconteur. He had wonderful stories and anecdotes, which he was able to relate in a very skillful and amusing way. Each time he would tell the story, he would embellish it a little bit more. Please understand that if he was telling a story about you, and being the diplomat that he was, he would naturally want to make you look good. So he would embellish the story in your favor. The only problem was that after telling the story many times, the story was no longer recognizable. Now, I'm sure that you all know that Allan's avocation was boating. He went to the Coast Guard school. He got certified in navigation and boat operation. He knew a lot about boating, and he became a skillful sailor. As I said before, Allan had a lot of friends, and he had different groups of friends and different circles of friends. And he had boating friends, and he had non-boating friends. I am a non-boating friend. But if you're a non-boating friend, you could still earn a ride on his boat by buying a car from him. Then he would take you for a ride on the boat, and maybe he would take you for dinner at Marlowe and Gertie Baylow's Beachcomber on the Grand River. During the summers, Allan would spend all his spare time on the water. One day, about 35 or 40 years ago, Allan decided that he was going to take an old friend of his and me on a weekend cruise to the islands, whatever that meant. So on the appointed day, the friend and I show up to begin our odyssey. The day was miserable. It was raining, windy, and cool, and the Grand River where the boat was docked was running fast. Nobody was going out that day, and Allan was on the dock talking to the other boaters congregated on the dock. Now the boat was docked perpendicular to the shore in a row of docks, with the bow facing the shore of the river, and the stern naturally facing out. In order to get out, Allan would have to back out into the current of surging river. Well, some of the boaters on the dock said it couldn't be done without cracking it up. We waited. It didn't seem to be letting up. So Allan had to make a decision. Should we go for it, or abort the trip. It was risky at best. Ever the gambler, Allan decided to take the chance and go ahead. Some people stood on the dock to fend us off in case the boat veered toward the dock. Allan took the helm. He put the engines in reverse, and with a blast of power, he plowed into the surging river, stern first. The current was pushing the boat sideways, but Allan got control, and he straightened it out. He shifted to forward and proceeded down the river, and there were a lot of people watching, and they started clapping and cheering. It was quite a scene. Everyone was impressed, especially me. We continued downriver to the open sea, Lake Erie, and headed west to downtown Cleveland, where we docked for the night at the Lakeside Yacht Club. Now the boat was roomy and it had several staterooms and a nice galley. But Allan expected his crew to keep the place shipshape, so he assigned us various duties, such as washing dishes and swabbing the deck. This was something I didn't expect. Continuing on, we made several stops. First Marblehead and then Put-in Bay, where we docked. We had bicycles on board, so we each took a bike and rode up to Perry's Monument. We went to the top. It was a nice view. We had a lot of exercise that day. Before heading home, we stopped at Pelee Island in Canada. We bought some souvenirs. We got back on board. And going home, the water was rough. The waves were coming over the bow. I'd never seen anything like that before. We all put on life preservers. Allan charted a course, using his compass and maps. No GPS in those days. He guided us home. He was indeed a real sailor. And oh yes, one more thing. He took off his life preserver when we got near the docks. He didn't want his boating friends, to see him wearing it. About Yiddishkeit. Jewishness was a big part of Allan's life. He was interested in all things Jewish. Language, culture, sights. When they traveled, Jerry and Allan would always look for Jewish places of interest. And although he wasn't an observant person, he always sought to learn more about his Jewish heritage. He had visited Israel, and he cared deeply about her welfare. Allan Leikin was a generous man, and he supported many charities. And I know that he helped many people anonymously. Allan was a mensch, and we're going to miss him. We're going to miss him a lot, and I'm going to miss him. He was a good friend. Things will be different without him. But we thank God that we had the pleasure of knowing him and that he won't be forgotten. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cody Puno, Allan Leikin's grandson. I'd just like to say a few words about Papa Allan. Some of my earliest memories of him include him teaching me about the 3 Great Lakes, and we used to play Monopoly. I'd always wondered if he had let me win, but later on in junior high, he had helped me with a school project on family history, where I actually learned a lot about his family history. I apologize, I lost my voice. Papa Allan always used to take me out to dinner when it was easier for him to, get around. What I appreciate most is the years of companionship he gave to my bubby. We will all miss him.
Really are twins. Go ahead.
Allan was born in 1934, and we all know he was very unique. With the Depression ongoing and World War II upcoming, most certainly there were many anxious moments in the Edward Leikin household during Allan's childhood. One would have to assume that those adverse times is what built the bond between him and his two brothers. The three shared a relationship of love, respect, and family, which lasted until each of their deaths. A relationship now that I'm sure will continue. In the early years, it was Allan's brother's children, Milt's children, that became his kids. As his brother Jerry, Allan would take all of us, Ronnie, Carrie, Jimmy, and I, wherever we wanted to go and buy us whatever we wanted to buy. Ronnie would later go on to spend a great deal of time with Allan as he began working at the dealership. Their relationship was not only as co-workers, but oftentimes a story or two about their nightlife together would crop up amongst conversation. Yet they obviously formed a special bond, a bond you always felt when you were with Allan and Ronnie, a bond that remained special up until the time of Allan's death. Carrie was, of course, his favorite niece. Allan served many terms as her confidant, sounding board, and bodyguard. He seemed always able to fulfill Carrie's many requests and managed to help keep Carrie mostly in line. In short, Allan was always there for Carrie when she needed him, as Carrie was there for Allan. Allan and Jimmy had a special bond that formed as Jimmy became dedicated to Allan, particularly in later years and through his many illnesses. There were no restrictions on this commitment, and through his many there's no restrictions on the commitment they had for each other. This commitment had no time limit. As Allan said to me recently when I visited him at the hospital, Jimmy was his nephew, but more than that, Jimmy was his best friend. As for my mother and Bert, I think I have a way to describe it. Allan used to say to me, "Do you know how long I've known your mother?" My mother was the sister Allan never had, and Allan was the brother that my mom always wanted. While equally stubborn at times, they would disagree, but never for long. They had just about lived their lives together, but they didn't do it in the traditional sense. They shared a love for each other and for those that they knew during their lifetimes and to whom they loved together. That was what was important to them, and that's what made their lives together so special. Having been unsuccessful at early relationships, Allan finally met Jerry. With Jerry, he found a partner. Todd and Kim became Allan's focus as he began raising a family that later included grandchildren. He saw his kids through school and helped them enter the world. Family was always Allan's priority in later years, and he was most proud of his family. The family that stuck with him even in when times were not all that good. So Allan, well, he could be stubborn at times, but he was also agreeable. Allan could be difficult, but he was also kind, he was caring. He lived life for the moment, and he loved to live. As my mother said this past week, he came at peace to himself. At previous visits, Allan and I always talked about the family. We talked most and especially about my father and what was going on in my life and Allan's. At the last visit, Allan spoke only about his life. He spoke about the great life he had had and the fact that he was ready to go. Allan was not able to leave this world with his name on any skyscraper. He wasn't able to leave this world with his name on any wing in any hospital. But Allan left his mark and his name on each one of us. That was the biggest way Allan was unique. He left this world in the best possible way, by being remembered and how he treated us and how he treated others. His legacy will be the mark that he left on each one of us.
I'll just say a couple words. You're going to speak? Yeah. So you're going to now know who the lawyer is and who's not. I wrote some notes, but I found that I wasn't really able to write that well. So I thought that I would just say tell you a couple stories about my Uncle Allan, and maybe that would tell some of you what kind of a person he was and what he was like. And I'll just say the stories. Many of you may remember about 8 years ago, Allan had an accident. He fell, hit his head on the wall, and we found him 24, 36 hours later, laying unconscious in his apartment. And Jerry was in Florida. Allan had come home, and I got the call, and I met the ambulance at the hospital, and met the surgeon. And Allan was unconscious, and Allan had given me instructions, and if ever anything happened, so the surgeon, okay, she says he needs surgery, brain surgery. And I said, well, he's already had one, and so here's another one. And I said, well, if he doesn't have the surgery, what's the chances of him living? And she says he won't. And I said, well, if he has the brain surgery, what's the chance of him living? And she said 15%. Well, Allan had the 10% rule. He said, if I had 10% chance to live, I live. And if you ever had to make that decision, that's how you guide it. So I said, we'll have the surgery. And Kimmy was actually with me at the time, and that's what we decided to do. She comes in, they do the surgery, and she comes into the room, and I remember Ronnie was there, and I said, how'd it go? She says, as well as expected. His brain was too swollen. We had to take the top off, and she was going to save it in case he ever needed it again, is what she said. And I said, well, what can we expect? And she said, he'll be in a coma for 6 to 8 months, and we'll see how he is when he wakes up. So, of course, I went there to see him, and every morning, and Jerry did, and we all did. And one morning I go in there, and the nurse comes running up to me, and she says, he woke up. I says, well, it's only been 3 days. And she says, he's trying to tell us something. So I get a piece of paper and a pen, and he writes very sloppily, and I could make it out, and he said, orange juice. He wanted a glass of orange juice. Well, he had all these tubes stuck down his throat, so they take all the tubes out of his throat, and the nurse is standing there, and she says, what year is it? And he says, 2008. Why? And of course, he had no recollection. And I remember the doctor coming to see him, and she actually came, I think, 3 or 4 mornings in a row and fed him breakfast because she could not believe that he was alive. And then my mom coined the famous phrase, Allan, you're the luckiest person on earth. And he said, why? And she says, because God just doesn't want you. And I think everybody's heard that Allan had 9 lives. That wasn't only his first one, his first struggle with illness. But and then I remember a couple days later, and this just tells you the way that I think people felt about him. Is a couple days later after work, I went into his room, and he was up, and I walked in. There were 3 people in his room sitting there talking about him, and he was lying in the bed asleep. And who were the 3 people? But it was his wife, Jerry, Judy, and Maxine. And I've never heard of anybody who had his 2 ex-wives and his wife there at his bedside while he was sleeping in the hospital. So it's nice of everybody to come because it's really nice. I had a few more stories how he always thought that Jeffrey and I were born just so he got kicked out of my mom and dad's house because there was no longer a bedroom for him, because he was not only a sister-in-law and an uncle, but he was a live-in brother-in-law and uncle. But one more story is, everybody keeps talking about the last couple of days of his life. He was so happy, he was at peace, he was ready to go. And I thought about that for a while, and Jerry, I didn't tell you this, but when we left Regency Hospital and we all walked out, I walked back in. I wanted to make sure we didn't leave anything there. And I opened up a couple drawers and I found some things. Kind of to my surprise, I didn't share this with you, Jerry, I'm sorry. But one of the things I found was this in the drawer, and there was nothing in it. So maybe that was one reason he was so happy. I mean, then I found this. It was half eaten. I imagine it was probably this long. I don't know. And then there's this sheet of paper, and on it is like every college football team with numbers next to it. I guess he thought if he bet last Saturday, it was a safe bet to lose. And then there's this receipt from a food delivery store for Hyde Park Grill. There's a porterhouse steak on here. And then last of all, and he did tell me this, he said if there was one last thing he wanted to do before he left us, he always said that there was one last thing he wanted to do and he needed me to help. And then I found it. I mean, I don't know where it came from, but it's a pack of caramels. He actually did tell me the last thing he wanted to do was have an English Oval, which he didn't have a chance. So much. Sorry, Rabbi, I made a mess. But so now we know why he was so happy when he was going. He finally got to do what he really wanted to do in life. So Allan had his ups and his downs, and he thought of us as his children. As he thought of me as his son. He always asked me how things were going. He was always concerned, and I appreciated Allan. And he had ups and downs in his life, but Allan always had one good thing. Allan was a good guy. He was a good guy, and I'll miss him like I miss my father. I really will, and that's a good thing. So, Rabbi, thank you. No, one more, Rabbi. Sorry.
Always one
You know, this is a celebration, so.
Yeah.
Can I get in there, Rabbi?
Ronnie, go ahead.
You all know Jimmy's not usually funny. But that was outstanding.
I'm taking the salami home.
Uncle Allan, or Elmer, as some of you used to teasingly call him, was quite a guy. Born in Cleveland, but experiencing life as a young adolescent in San Antonio, Texas, with his pet goat, was always the first guy to reach into his pocket whenever a good friend or relative was in need or there was a good time to be had. When I lived on Lyman, he was my roommate. He didn't have his own room. We shared a room. We shared a room for a while. Thankfully, it wasn't a very long time because they did come along. I think I was around 12, or I would have been around 12. He was around 40 and single. He taught me how to drive in the May Company parking lot at Cedar Center after my bar mitzvah. I was 13. But again, it was after my bar mitzvah. I was old enough at that point, he reasoned. We traipsed around county fairs the summer I turned 16, hawking Toyota Corollas for $1,769. Really, automatic transmissions, but no air conditioning and no radio. When I finished school at Texas at 22, broke, Milton was not the generous, gracious guy with all of us that my siblings are making him out to be. He loaned me money so that I could traipse around Europe for 2 months, where I learned a lot about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Then I went to work for him. What went on during those 7 years could fill a long, long story. But between him, Milton, and Larry Scull, I not only got my baptism, excuse me, Rabbi, in the car business, but had a great time. They didn't pay me much, but what they taught me has lasted me a lifetime. Needless to say, again, I could go on. There's lots of stories. Those of you that knew Allan know he loved a good time. He was a wonderful uncle. He was a great friend. He was a terrific family member. And I think everybody loved him truly, especially his bookmakers. With that, I'll say, Allan, I'm going to miss you. I'm sure he'll see his brother, his friends that he's lost at this point in time, and then I'm sure he'll try and stay away from big underdogs, hard tens, and inside straights. And I suspect his first call will be either to Curly, Fat Teddy, or Big George, but he'll be happy. And Jimmy was right, he was a great guy. Your turn. Get up. Yeah.
Rabbis tell us, Dvarim hayotzim min halev, words that come from the heart go directly to the heart. You heard beautiful stories about a wonderful life of a wonderful man. Allan was born in this community, he was raised in this community, he lived here all of his life. He went to Kent University, Ohio State University. He went there. I didn't say he graduated, but his brothers Milton and Jerry Oliver Shalom, he was devoted to his family. He was a devoted uncle to nephews and niece. And the stories of his prowess in business, you heard. Wonderful life. Actually, I don't feel out of a funeral service. I'm at a service celebrating somebody's beautiful life, which he had with you, Jerry, with Kim, with Todd, with Jimmy, Shirley and Bert and Ronnie, and the chapel just brimming with people standing outside, because you've all come as a sign of saying thank you. That's what you're trying to say. Thank you for a beautiful life of a wonderful man. He was determined to live. At Peter Lewis, I ran into him a few times because my wife was there as well. He would be on one wall and my wife would be on the other, walking, trying to do their exercise and saying, I want to live. That was Allan. He was a kind and giving person, and all of you, I'm sure, could tell me a story about him. It may be funny, may be sad, but everybody has a story about Allan because of his manner of life. You know, the rabbis tell us that a life which is one, there are two ways of going through life. One is giving, the other is taking. There are people who want to take out of life. they don't give. But there are others who give of themselves, give of their wisdom, give of their wealth that they have, whatever it is. Allan was ready to give. And this is why you're all here. And we are all here to express our praises of him. And that's what we heard this afternoon. The life of a man who was giving of his life, not taking, but giving. And so we say to you, the family, to the people that are here, his friends, members of the community, we want to say thank you to Allan for a beautiful and a wonderful life. We say the mysteries of life and death are beyond human understanding. We are perplexed and overwhelmed when pain and anguish before those whom we love. In sorrow, confronted by death which has taken Allan Leikin from our midst, we feel our frailty. Like delicate flowers, we flourish only for a day. Eternal God, Shepherd of Israel, guide us, your flock, with love, with compassion. Do not abandon us, and draw us closer to you. Grant solace and comfort unto those who mourn, and may their lives together help to sustain them and add the blessing to the years which have been we are celebrating really a life of a beloved man, Allan Leikin. In the valley of the shadow of death, beside the still waters, and in the green pastures, you, O Lord, are our shepherd. Be our strength and our shield, our stay and our comfort throughout all of our days. To you, Jerry, to Kim, to Todd, and to the nephews and niece, Jimmy and Bert and Ronnie and Shirley and members of the family and all the friends. We say, Adonai no Son, God gives life, Adonai lo koch, and now in his infinite wisdom, he has seen fit to return unto himself the neshama, the soul of a wonderful person. I could still visualize his smiling face. He had a cherubic smile. It was really just something that was unusual. And that's, people take away certain things. You meet somebody, and sometimes, some people it's easy to forget, but some people you just can't forget. And Allan was a person that you can't forget. You met him, you knew you met somebody special. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life, we say, and we answer, Amen. We rise for the El Mole. El Mole Rachamim Shochem Bamromim Hamesei Menuch V'Nachono Tachas Kamfei Ashchinu B'Mahalos Kedoshim Itohorim Ki Zohar Horokia Basirim Es Nishmas Elio B'Reb Avrom Sholach Li'Olomo Began Eden Tei Menuch Osov L'Chein Balarachamim Yastreu B'Seiser Knofech Li'Olomim Utzror B'Tzror Achayim Es Nishmoso Adonai unachaloso v'yonoch b'shalom ameshkavo v'nomar amen. God exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Allan Leikin, who is gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you to remember all the worthy and the righteous deeds he performed in the land of the living, and may his soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord ever be his portion. May his rest be peace. And let us all answer, Amen. We can be seated.
Others to step forward.